Yeah, I'm going to start with just a simple box. Let's create a new scene. For some reason, this has been happening today. Some of my icons are actually disappearing, which is a little weird. But I'll just go to Create Polygon Cube. There we go. So with this cube, I will give it a height of, let's say, 20. That's okay. Give it a subdivision in height as well of, let's say, 20. So every centimeter there's a division, right? Very, very basic object. If we go into Deform, there are a lot of tools that are kind of interesting. They're kind of useful for rigging or for, you know, kind of wrapping objects around other objects and things of that nature. But one of the kind of like fundamental sort of tool sets that we have is the nonlinear deformers. So that's right under Deform, nonlinear deformer, and I'm going to just click on the little bar here to tear this off. So we'll kind of float that window. So the first one we have is bend. We saw this last week. Now you can, you know, go in and adjust some of the basic options by clicking on this right away. So I'm going to just hit create, and initially it looks like nothing happens, right? You can punch in a curvature number here. Usually what I'll do though is go over to the Attribute Editor. So what's basically happening, if I hit 4, you'll see that technically I've got the nonlinear deformer, which is this green line in the middle. It's selected once it's applied. So it has 3 nodes. So the node on the far right is actually the curvature control, right? So we can see what's happening to that mesh. There is the low bound, so you can actually limit where that curve happens. So it can actually happen, you know, starting at a higher point. So from a certain point and below, it'll not be applied. And the same thing can be said from above as well. So we can actually have a high bounds where we limit where this curvature happens above. So that's really interesting. Another way to deal with this is you can actually grab this thing and modify it just by grabbing it. You can grab it and rotate it, right, to change the angle of curvature or what axis it's applied on. And this is actually the same thing as going into this tab here, which is the bend handle. And you can manually punch these numbers in here as well. But my preference is to just go and directly grab the modifier and then, you know, maybe rotate it into position. Now you may notice if I rotate this on a certain axis, there's not a whole heck of a lot happening. And that's either because the width isn't there, right? So this thing would have to be wider. So if I go in and grab the actual mesh, go to the polycube, and let's say increase its width to like 5. And it needs divisions as well. So when you don't have enough definition or divisions, you can't get a curvature or a bend to happen. So again, when we have enough mesh to define that, right, we get curvature in that mesh. So it's one thing to sort of think about or consider when you're doing these kind of warps to objects, is to think, well, you know, do they have enough shape to be kind of skewed and distorted? So yeah, let me go grab the bend modifier and go to the Attribute Editor and switch the curvature up. So let's really kind of curl that around, right? So this is one way you can actually build a custom cylinder or a wall in Maya. I mean, of course, you can use actual cylinders as well, but this is just to kind of show you a quick example of that. Now, again, if you want to make this a permanent part of the mesh, you can go to Edit, Delete by History, and that handle goes away. This becomes a permanent embedded part of that model. Okay? Yeah. I hit 4 on the keyboard. So yeah, when I went to wireframe mode, it's 4. 5 shows you the surface. So let me just create another cube. I'll create a similar cube to what I had actually. So I'll go height of 20, subdivisions for the height 20. So yeah, I hit 4. Oops, not with the subdivision selected. Let me just click off that, click on. 4 is your wireframe mode. 5 is shaded, 6 is shaded with textures, and 7 is shaded with textures and lighting, but there's no lighting in the scene. So a lot of times I'll switch to 4 to kind of just see the the kind of cage of the model to see, you know, where some of these things may be hidden. Flare, this one's actually pretty cool too, so I'll go to flare. Usually, it's funny, I tell you guys, like, if you ever have an options box, you just go into the options. I find it much better to actually create this and apply it, because once this thing is applied, and again, if we go to the Attribute Editor, the flare has 3 nodes to it, right? So it's got flare 1, which is basically where the flaring is active. So you can flare, let me just zoom out so we can see this. So flare across X, across Z. In this case, yeah, Y wouldn't make sense. What's great about this is there's a curvature function. So you can actually bulge this or sort of flute it, depending on what you would like to do. And again, you can actually grab the this kind of warp and shift its position. And you can get some really kind of crazy results that way, right? Just turn up the grid so it's maybe a little easier to see. So that's actually a really fun tool. And again, if you need to rotate it and warp its axis, again, if it's on a 90-degree angle, this won't do much unless I go back to, let me click on this and go to the channel box here, go back down to its kind of original creation settings and give it some divisions and height. So now you can see you can get kind of warping on a different axis, on a different angle, right? And if you don't like it, you can just grab it and delete it, and you get back to your original object. So that's true of most of these nonlinear deformers. Sine wave and wave, or sine and wave, are kind of similar in a sense. So again, if I go to the Attribute Editor, go to sine, and hit amplitude, you see you get kind of this wave. And if we offset, it gives you that kind of like audio wave looking animation. There's, you know, some options here. You can drop off the curvature, blah blah blah. Now what's cool about this is you can actually combine these things, right? So I should keep this window open. So if I could do a wave and then apply a bend. Oops, so I got to grab the actual mesh first and then go bend, and then we just warp the curvature. We can rotate again which axis it's applied upon, right? So we can get some kind of crazy shapes by chaining together those warps. So sine and wave. Wave is sort of similar. The only difference between sine and wave is that the wave function, yeah, let me go to amplitude. So there's the wave function. Again, I'll probably have to turn it on its side so we can see actually what's happening. All right, so there's the amplitude. But it's almost like creating a rippling effect. So yeah, let me just cycle through the wavelength so you can see. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, wavelengths. And then I'll go to offset. There we go. So you can sort of see it's kind of creating like a rippling effect in a way. So there's a center point to this. And so the sine wave function is actually kind of similar. It's just like that center point is kind of offset. And there's a max min radius. So if I increase this, again, it sort of just looks like the sine function. So that's kind of one small difference. You see there's kind of a center point to this wave function, right? So it's almost like a rippling effect. So let me just select that and delete it. There's squash. So let's take that. Yeah. So this is kind of like a stretch and squash, right? So there's the factor, which is kind of your stretch. So it kind of keeps the endpoints almost to scale, and it stretches super thin in the middle. And when you squash it, again, the endpoints kind of retain their sort of size or shape, and the midpoint kind of plumps out or gets kind of squat, and it really tries to kind of maintain the volume of the object. So like in a cartoony character or any object that's kind of animated in a cartoony fashion, you'd want to maintain volume, but you just want to stretch it thin or make it kind of short and squat and kind of fat and plump. So yeah, that's kind of one way to sort of create a shape like that. Oops, I am going crazy here with the slider. There we go. And again, like all these, you just simply click on the mesh, you can go delete by history, and it makes that a permanent part of the model. So I'm going to try to grab this thing. There we go. Delete that. So that's squash. And then there's twist. Twist is kind of interesting. So I want to just show you one example where, I mean, oftentimes twisting and the bend modifier combined. So there's a start and an end angle. So if we have the end angle here. So this is how you do like wrought iron for, you know, like staircases and railings and things of that nature. Very, very easy. You know, there can be a little bit of a struggle between, let's say, poly count. So if I go to the channel box here, go to polycube 1, which is its creation. If I take out the divisions, you'll see how kind of weird and crappy this will look. So you do need a certain number of divisions for the length and for the amount of twisting that's happening for this to kind of represent the shape. And as we step up from 6, 7, 8, right, maybe to 12. 12 would probably be like a minimum in this case to get this to display correctly. Just turn off the wireframe. So again, if you wanted that kind of twisted sort of wrought iron look, you would need to first you know, get the divisions right. And if you have a lot of these, again, you wouldn't set them super high. Like 36 would look great, nice and smooth curvature, but it's a lot of mesh. Like just this small piece is 146 faces, so I could add it really, really quickly, especially if you have intricate, you know, kind of vine work with this sort of stuff. And again, we can bend this on top of that. So if we go to the, I've just added a bend, and we can do a curvature, right? We can set a high bound or a low bound, right? So it's important to kind of keep track of that, you know, see where you need the mesh to go and what defines what. So I'll show you this. This is another kind of idea of making sure. So the reason I don't have any, let's say, width or depth divisions is that I think if I add them, in this case, these extra edges, you see I just added, let's say I'll add 8. So they're going from vertically, right, from left to right. So these loops actually don't really define anything in that surface. Like they're not adding any definition to the model. So these are cases where I would not add that to the mesh. I would keep this to its bare minimum. Same thing with the depth. Like let's say add this, set this to 12. This is going across the other side, and again, it doesn't add anything to the shape. It just adds polygons unnecessarily. So I'd keep that out. In this case, the only kind of detail or factor that adds any kind of detail is the height segments. So it's important to kind of keep these nodes active and alive when you first start building stuff so that you can kind of quickly jump up and down. Just keep in mind though, if you start doing edits, like if you do direct edits where you're like extruding and so if I do an extrude face and blah blah blah, right, or delete something else, not that I would necessarily do that, but if I go back and change this subdivision count to like, I don't know, 25, it could push this off somewhere else, right? It could warp or drastically change where that edit is happening. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's sort of one thing to kind of keep in mind is, you know, a lot of times when I do my basic editing or when I do that first sort of yeah, we can delete these nodes, by the way. So if you want to kind of undo the edits, you can go to select the node. So in this case, I had an extrude face node, so I'm going to grab that node. There we go. And go to edits, delete node, and that can take the edit out. So I can go back and put the edit where I need to put it. So there's a certain value, right, to keeping the history in your objects, keeping it kind of live. But at a certain point, you do have to commit to what you've done, and you want to delete the history, just because it keeps the scene kind of lighter, cleaner, more organized. Okay, one last thing to mention about all this stuff. So let me grab this modifier, delete that. Actually, let's see here. Did I delete? Yeah, I'll take the bend, go to edit, delete node. So I want to keep the twist here. One other thing you can do is go to deform. There's another option which I find is often used in modeling. It's called the lattice function. So it's right here. And basically you've got divisions. So there's a division for X, Y, and Z. In this case it's a 3 by 3 by 3, and it'll fit itself around the mesh. So if I go create, you'll see you've got this kind of box around the object. So if I go right click lattice point with that lattice selected, what's great about this is I can now manually move that point. So I'm going to show you an example, just a very quick example of how this may be useful. Let's go to polygon primitives. I'm going to go to cylinder. So yeah, let's say we want to kind of create a pipe where there's, actually before I do that, let me just duplicate that. So I'll rotate one piece of a pipe here. So I'm going to scale this guy up, scale it wide, and then I'll move this thing up. Now, I should mention this too. This is something else that maybe didn't come up last week, but a lot of times when I'm modeling, you know, I will often look for, if I have to connect these two pieces, you know, I don't know if we did Booleans last week. We didn't do Booleans last week, did we? I don't think we did. Okay, I'll come to that in a second, but if these two pieces are just simply going to overlap, right, where I sort of like make one look like it's sitting on top of the other, I would, generally speaking, try to line up the edges. Right, so this, this edge, right, I'd want to line up with this edge here. Same thing. So I generally want the counts to match up. In this case, they're pretty good. I've actually got a few extra edges, so I could simplify this thing down. I probably don't need to, but let me just take this down to like 14, 12. 12 is pretty close, right? They match up fairly closely. I think I'm okay with 20. So what I'm going to do is just go to, yeah, let's go to face mode. I'm going to select through this and deselect that. So I'm actually grabbing the bottom faces only because I basically just want to delete them. They're going to be overlapping. They're going to be in contact with each other. So I don't need those faces to sit there unnecessarily taking up resources. Next up, I'll go to vertex and shift double click to go all the way around. And in this case, I can go to deform. So what's great about this, including the nonlinear deformers like bend and twist, you can actually have selections or parts of the mesh selected and apply those transformations and deformations to a specific area. So it's actually a really, really kind of powerful way to work with these things. So I'm going to go to lattice. I don't need, what is it? Y is the vertical, so I don't really need any extra divisions on the vertical. I'm just going to focus on X and Z. So that's left to right, front and back, not up and down, since I'm dealing with a very flat series of vertices. And I might just set this to maybe like 4 by 4. I'll try that for now and hit create. Oh yeah, and this thing has to be set to 2 as a minimum. So I'm going to go create. So now if I go to lattice points, right? I should have gone with, I think, a more, yeah, let me undo that. I'm going to go with 5. That way I have a midline, right? So in this case, I need a center line. So I'm going to go 5 by 5 because I'm not sure which axis I'm facing. I should have paid attention to that, but I'm just going to go create. Now, if I grab this lattice and right-click and go lattice point, what I generally would do is grab pretty much all the lattice points. Hit F4 so you can see that. I'll deselect the midpoint because that's basically touching right now. So what I'll do is I'll basically pull down until I get some sort of contact with the surface. Control, click and drag to deselect, and then I can pull down the outer edges. So now I get fairly good contact, right, between the two surfaces. We just lift this up. Oops. I'm going to have to, yeah, let's just take a look at both of these. Hit F4, right? So one piece of pipe is sitting pretty cleanly across the other, right? It's a fairly useful way to kind of manipulate objects. And this is a simple example, but things can obviously get more complex than that. I'm just going to go delete history. Just to show you. So let's say I want to just kind of nudge this thing up a little bit. Let me go to edge mode. I'll hit F4 so I can kind of see through this. Double click, shift right click, extrude. I'm going to just hit, there's a little reset button. You guys can see this. It's like a little power icon. Because right now, I think this is aligned to the local XYZ. So it's kind of averaging whatever's selected. If I reset this, it'll set it to the world. And I can pull this thing straight down. Right? So now I'll go to face mode. Shift double click around. Shift extrude faces. This I'll leave on local Z and pull that out. So that way you guys can see if I expand this just a little bit, and then I'll move this thing up, right? Got a pretty good fit for that pipe. And of course, if there's any tweaking, you can always go in and grab those vertices and kind of pull them or nudge them into place as need be. But that's a pretty good way to get you know, one object to sort of fit another, right? So to mention this as kind of an alternate example, I talked about this a little earlier. There's Booleans. So Booleans basically allows you to cut one object into another. This usually involves a little bit more editing. So sometimes there's a value in keeping objects kind of like separate floating pieces. Since I've deleted the history in this, I could in theory just grab both meshes, shift right click, and combine them. So there's still technically two separate pieces of mesh, but I can go in and edit each one individually still. In this case, if we wanted to combine them directly, what I would do is sort of look at the, you know, try to look at the way the mesh lines up. So I'm going to scale this up just a bit. And so I want that outer edge to just touch this edge if I can get it to. And I'll go to the, oh, shoot. Yeah, unfortunately I lost my count here, so I might just go back and create another cylinder. So I'm going to go back and go to Polygon Cylinder. There we go. And just get that center line to match. So I'll go to Poly Cylinder. I'm going to change this. So I'm going to go kind of in small increments, like 18, 16. And increase the radius a little bit as well. 1.5, 1.2, 1.1. There we go. So that's pretty much in contact. It's pretty close. Maybe a little bit less than that. 1.108. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, so I'm basically just kind of dialing this down to see if I can get a good match. I may have to actually go up. So I'll go to 24. Yeah, I'll go back down to 12. Yeah, it's pretty close. I mean, these edges are lining up. Now, you may wonder, well, why the hell does this matter? I'll show you in a second. So what I'm going to do is grab both of these. Let's just, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move this off. So, again, when I'm modeling, I usually like to be kind of center of the world. So I'm going to go hit 0 on this, on the Z-axis, and I'll hit 0 on this. So I know these two pieces are dead center, okay? So they line up perfectly across that center line. These edges are matching up pretty closely. So what I'll do is I'll go to Modify. Make sure I'm in Modeling. Go to Mesh, Boolean. And we've basically got three. So that's under Modeling, Mesh, Booleans. And we've got three types. There's Union, Difference, and Intersection. So if I go to Union, it basically makes this one connected combined mesh. If I go to, and you can, you know, this thing will pop up. There's Difference, so it actually will cut, right, the one piece away from the other. And there's the Intersection, which is the overlapping part. So this can be useful sometimes when you need really complex shapes. Cut one shape into another, right? Problem with this is it gets kind of messy. So I'll just click off of that to set that. Maybe I'll actually just do a quick delete by history. So now if I'm dealing with this in vertex mode, you can see, right, these vertices don't quite match up. So that can cause problems, especially if you ever plan to smooth this. So if I hit 3, you see what it does. It's pretty ugly, right? So a lot of times when you're doing Booleans, I find it really important to get as close as you can to matching edges or edge loops. What I probably should have done as well is prepared this mesh a little better for the Boolean. So I'm going to actually go through, shift double click through here. I'm going to create a connecting edge. So shift right click, connecting edge, and you see it actually creates this edge right here, right? Now this may be hard to see. I'm going to see if I can zoom into this as close as possible. There's actually a little gap here. Probably the same on both sides. If you need to get really close, by the way, to an object, and your Maya just kind of like, it goes almost like through the object to see inside, you can sort of cheat the system a bit. You can click on your perspective camera on the left side or in the outliner. On the right side, I'll go to the Attribute Editor. And under here, so under the top camera attributes, for near clipping plane, I'll set it to like 0.001. So what that basically means is that the camera can get within 0.001 centimeters of an object before it like cuts out the image. So again, let me hit F. There we go. So now you see I'm really, really close up, right? And you do see that gap. I have to F to kind of frame it because it's so small. But I'll shift, right click, and connect. So when you're in vertex mode and you connect across open vertices, it'll create a connecting edge. For me, it's a very clean way to get a connecting edge, and I'll hit G to repeat my last command. Hit, oops, let me hit F so I can zoom in on that. So that creates a nice connecting edge there. What I should probably do, by the way, since this thing is so symmetrical, I'll basically go into face mode and delete half of this guy. You know, sometimes you can just use the command here in symmetry settings, right? You can go into, you can double click on the select tools, the move, scale, rotate tool, and turn on your symmetry. In this case, I think it might be on Z, if I'm not mistaken. So let me, yeah, is that working? No, that's the wrong axis. So symmetry on, I guess it'll be X, yeah. So you could, you know, kind of work this way where you keep symmetry on both sides. That's certainly not a problem. So if I go to connect, right, gonna get a connecting edge across both sides. So I want to show you guys some other nifty functions here. You can double click on the move tool, and there's what's called a transform constraint. So if you're in the move, scale, rotate, it's pretty much in the top portion of those settings. You can constrain to edge or surface. I usually do edge. What's great about this, the beautiful thing about this, is that it allows you to kind of slide edges along a surface without accidentally pulling them off and distorting the overall shape. So I can only kind of move the current selected edges along the surface that exists. So what I'll often do is kind of pull in, yeah, try to pull in fairly close to this. So I just kind of want to create a bit of a, I guess, a border to this. So I'm going to grab these guys here and just kind of give this a nice equally spaced border, right? This is more kind of technical, I guess, modeling, poly modeling. Now you may wonder, why am I doing this? The reason I'm creating this kind of buffer region or border around this area is so that I can actually move this vertex over to here without distorting the overall shape of the rest of the pipe. If that makes sense. Yeah, I hope it does. So yeah, now if I go, so I've got the modeling toolkit open on the right side. I can go to target weld. So since I'm in vertex mode, click and drag, and you see, hopefully, there we go, come on, snap to it. There. So I've just kind of nudged that vertice, so it's going to create a bit of a cleaner, right, connection, and both sides are done, so that's good. Now let me just get out of this and go into object mode, hit W or Q just to get out of the target weld mode. If you hit 3 on the smoothing, you see you get a better result. By the way, with smoothing, I mentioned this earlier, one of the reasons we like 4-sided polygons in general is that, you know, when you have a lot of triangles, you can get some very strange, ugly looking smoothing results, right? There is a little trick to this, so if you ever plan to smooth anything, leaving edges open will kind of create a hard edge at that end. So if I hit 3, right, that pipe just remains kind of crisp and clean. So we've got this sort of smoothing effect going on, right? I do probably still need to kind of clean up this area. So again, let me take this, delete this. So again, this is a little bit different style of modeling. You know, instead of just having 2 pieces overlap, this is using a bit of smoothing, using editing, and using Booleans to actually directly combine mesh. Yeah, let's do this. I will go into the cut tool. So I'm going to cut from this vertice, which is nice and clean, and then I'm going to cut across here. And you may be wondering, well, why do that? Okay, I'll explain in a second. I'll take this edge out, and then I'll take this edge out. So I've actually got 4-sided polys all the way across here, right? So let's, okay, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to have to redo because I didn't do this in Symmetry like I should have. There we go. So let's double click the Symmetry tool. So I'm going to do Symmetry, I think, in, yeah, I'll leave it actually on. So this is one of the limits I find. I want to mention this. So there's a certain limitation to Symmetry in Maya. I'll turn off my edge constraint as well, just so I can show you guys this. Yeah, if I go Symmetry, what was it? X, I think. X. No, probably Z. Object Z. Yeah. So Symmetry is great across one axis, but not more than one axis. So sometimes what I'll do, just to show you guys this, is I will delete. So let me switch off my Symmetry, which I can do on the modeling toolkit as well. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually delete this mesh. So I'll delete, let's say, a half of the mesh. So I really am working a little bit smarter. So I'll delete half, take this existing half, go to Edit, duplicate Special. I'm going to reset the tool because I don't want to take on the last tool settings. I'll go to Instance and do a negative. What is this on? I believe that is X. So if I go negative X, -1, and apply, right? I can now actually have essentially instancing across multiple axes. So that was a mirror across X, and I'm going to do a Symmetry across Z. So now I can work, right, doubly fast, not just working across one axis, but two. So again, I'll go back to, I guess, edge mode. I'm going to work on my cutting. There we go. So cut from here to here. In fact, I could probably just go from here to here. So that creates a little bit of a cleaner mesh. I may also go back to multi-cut and keep this kind of cuff consistent. Try that again. And sometimes, by the way, this tool can be really touchy depending on what you're doing. Okay, so I've got this little area. I'll go to vertex mode. I had to create a little extra edge here, but I'm going to just do a target weld from here to here. There we go. That sort of heals that up. I'll take care of this a little bit later. And you see it's done across both sides, and now it's actually done across, right, all sort of four sides at once. So that kind of keeps things kind of quick and easy for me. Let's go back to object mode. I'll grab both pieces. I'm going to actually combine them now. So sometimes you strategically have to split an object in half and mirror it. Sometimes the Symmetry tool on its own is great. Again, Maya has a few kind of modeling shortcomings, I guess, in that respect. 3D Max would have a huge advantage in that way, or maybe even ZBrush. I'm going to go to Merge Vertices. So I want to combine the vertices along that center line, so it's going to be back as one kind of complete whole. And then if I go to edge mode, yeah, let me just see. I think I'll take out these edges here. So you see what happens actually is I maintain four-sided polys all the way through, right? Go to object mode. Let's hit 3 to smooth this. This is looking a little better. It's pretty cool, right? If I go to edge mode, I can double-click cleanly across that loop. And now I can do a bevel. Maybe I'll give this like 2 segments. Maybe 3 actually is okay. So that's the value of having quads, having a good, clean, grid-like layout to your mesh, is that it's so fast, so easy to model. And if I smooth this, right, I now have this really cool, nice, clean curvature that fits that shape, right? It's a beautiful. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of kind of like both methods. You know, for you guys, since you're kind of new to this, controlling a low-res mesh and a smooth model, it may be a little bit difficult at first, but I find if you can kind of put that effort into it now and make your mistakes now, it'll help you further along later on. But don't be afraid to kind of mix and match techniques, right? Just kind of using multiple objects, starting with primitives, and then finding ways to get them to connect, overlap, or in some cases actually merge them together. I should show you one other thing here before I finish this demo. I'm going to just undo a couple steps. Yeah, so if I go across, let's say go across here, the multi-cut. So I'm going to hold control. A lot of times if you want, hopefully you guys will notice this, if I hold control, you see as I go towards this edge loop near the top, it's going to be nice and parallel to it. And you see how it gradually will fit the shape towards the bottom. If you want to be fairly good at mimicking that shape, I want to create that lip like I did in the other mesh, but I actually want to do it via an extrusion here. So I'm going to just get very, very close, as close as I can. Click to set that loop, and then go back to edge mode. Double click this. I don't need slide in this case because I can just pull up along the axis because I've kept things nice and neat. Let's go across the face here and do maybe an extrusion on local Z. Now if we smooth this, it's going to look super weird, right? So that's just hitting 3. So a lot of times what you need to do is kind of add either a creasing. So I'm going to go in across here and yeah, let's do that. I can either do the Crease Tool. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if I middle mouse click and drag, it creates a kind of faux sharpness, right? So that's one way to do that. Or this method is, I think, maybe in some ways a little better, but it actually adds more edges, which means it gets a little more difficult to sort of control. So you're splitting each edge into, each loop gets split into 2 loops, right? So that's, you know, you're going from 1 to 2 loops if you keep it at segment 1. If you keep it at segment 2, even more loops. And again, depending on how many of these you have, it could just really add a lot to your poly count. So there's a certain kind of advantage to both. Like I find this method of beveling looks better, looks more accurate, I should say, compared to the other methods. But creasing, it keeps things light, keeps it fairly easy to handle. So anyways, those are a couple of ways to kind of go about working on the same sort of piece of mesh, right? Like I said, working with primitives, by the way, is a great way, like keeping shapes simple, easy, light. It's going to help in your scenes, especially when you've got lots and lots of objects.